He would say, I'm Johnny Cash. And that voice kind of waved. Every time he get up there, you know, he'd introduce himself. He'd say, I'm Johnny Cash. And I used to imitate him a little bit. But there was one song in particular that I think about when I think about this lesson today in particular. And it was a song that wasn't wrote by him. You see, it was actually a poem before he sang it. And it was called A Boy Named Sue. Y'all know what I'm talking about? And that was a story that was written, actually a poem by the guy's name, I looked it up, his name was Shel Silverstein. But everybody gives Johnny Cash credit for it because he sang the song. And I'm going to talk about a little bit of it, read a little bit of it, and then come back at the end. And we'll talk about why I'm talking about it anyway. I mean, I just couldn't help to think about it. And a boy named Sue. I mean, think about it. A boy named Sue, you kind of doomed from the beginning. You're going to be picked on because your name's Sue, right? He said, well, my daddy left home when I was 3. And he didn't leave much to Ma and me. Just this old guitar and a bottle of booze. Now, I don't blame him because he run and hid. But the meanest thing that he ever did was before he left and went and named me Sue. He said, well, he must have thought it was quite a joke, and it got lots of laughs from a lot of folks, and it seems I had to fight my whole life through. Some guy would giggle and I'd get red, and some guy would laugh and I'd bust his head. And I tell you, life ain't easy for a boy named Sue. Well, I grew up quick and I grew up mean, and he said, my fists got hard and my wits got keen, and you roamed from town to town to hide my shame, but I made me a vow to the moon and stars, and he searched everywhere until he found the person that found his name and get cut to the chase here. And he said, but he was in Gatlinburg in mid-July, and he just hit the town, his throat was dry, and he stopped in this saloon here, and guess who he sees sitting there at the bar? He sees his dad. He says, and he saw that mean dog who named me Sue. He said, well, I knew that snake was my own sweet dad from a worn-out picture that my mama had. I knew the scar on his cheek was his evil eye. He was big and bent, gray and old, and I looked at him and my blood ran cold. And he said, my name is Sue. How do you do? You see? He said, now you're going to die, and that's what I told him. Well, I hit him right between the eyes, and he went down, but to my surprise, he came up with a knife and cut off a piece of my ear. That's in the poem now. This is the poem where the song comes from. But I busted a chair right across his teeth, and as we crashed through the wall and talked about fighting and gouging and so on and so forth, and he said, I'll tell you I fought tougher men, but I really can't remember when. I kicked him he kicked you like a mule and bit like a crocodile. I heard him laughing and cussing, and he went for his gun and I put mine first, and he stood there and looked at me and I saw a smile. And he said, son, this world is rough, and if a man's going to make it, it's got to be tough. And I knew I wouldn't be there to help you along, so I gave that name as I said goodbye. I knew you'd have to get tough or die. And it's that name that helped you to be strong. I got all choked up and I threw down my gun, called him Pa, and he called me a son. And I came away with a different point of view, and I think about him now and then, every time I try, every time I win. And if ever I have a son, I think I'm going to name him Bill or George, anything but Sue. Now, why did I put that in there? I put that in there because that's some people's life. Some people live a life like that for whatever reason. Might not be a name, but a life like that where they on the run and they got problems growing up like I did, and maybe some of you did. You see? It don't have to be that way, folks. You see, it doesn't. See, we got the power from the Holy Spirit to break through the chains that sometimes bind us. Whether it be a name, as in Jabez. Jabez could have did like Johnny Cash's song and like that Silverstein poem I just ran. He could have rolled over and played dead the rest of his life, and Jabez would not be in that King James Bible right now. But what he did was he rose up from that. You see? Just because we're taught some bad things, or just because our past weren't perfect, none of us was, if we be honest with ourselves this morning, right? And Brother Melvin says we got to straighten up our halo sometimes. We weren't born perfect. You see, just because we were raised in a certain family or certain things happened, thank God when we got saved, it's behind God. Puts in the sea of forgetfulness. You see? Just because you might have had a certain reputation, or a certain way of this, a certain way of that. You see? Doesn't mean that's the way it's got to be now in eternity. You see? Doesn't mean to be that way. All I'm saying is that we have the ability to rise above everything. My Bible teaches me in 1 Corinthians 15 and 10. See, God is able to take us as He finds us and transform us into something called a new creature. Take Jacob, for example. The name Jacob literally means, I looked it up, supplanter, trickster, heel grabber, meaning that you're going to trip something up. He's a heel grabber. Yeah, I know some heel grabbers, don't you? His name literally means a heel grabber, where you just grab the heel, try to pull make them fall. That's what it means. God transformed his name into Israel. You know what Israel means? A prince with God. When you got saved, God transformed you too. That's right. And when he looks down, he sees Jesus Christ. You see? That's what he does. He don't see no Johnny Cash song or no Silverstein poem. He sees his son. And he don't see no supplanter, no trickster. He sees a prince with God. He sees Jesus Christ living in you. He wants to enlarge our coast today. That's what he wants to do in this lesson. You see, you can rise above your past and your circumstances because the devil is going to bring it up every time that he can get into your mind and say, well, you know when you were this and that, and you were back then, way back when, and you did this and that. The devil's going to bring that up. And the devil's going to try to haunt you with that thing. But with God, all things are possible. And you can move forward, you see. And you can say, I'm a prince with God because I'm saved. You can say that. I like this, and you know, I got my boot off. Sometimes I wear it if my leg gets tired, but thank goodness I got to take it off. But I'm glad that I can take my boot off because I don't know if y'all remember a lady named Wilma Rudolph. You remember her? 1960 Olympian. You can rise above your past, your circumstances, and some of you may have heard of Wilma Rudolph. She was an Olympic athlete in the 1960s, but probably most of you don't know her story. I had to look into it. She was 16th of 18 children in a poor black family lived in Middle Tennessee. When she was born, she weighed 4 pounds, 1 ounce. When she was 4, she contracted polio and lost the use of her left leg, which I reasoned with that because for 6 weeks, I had to be strapped into a cast. I didn't lose it, but I mean, it resonated with me as I was reading the story. And she battled with polio that left her weakened, and she immediately developed chronic pneumonia and scarlet fever, to say the least. And even though she managed to survive those deadly diseases, she spent the bulk of her childhood as a cripple. And it was only through years of therapy, now listen to this, which her mother carried her on her 1 day off a week, and determination that Wilma was able to regain the use of her left leg. And I did not know this about Wilma Rudolph. I knew she was an Olympian. She went on to play high school basketball, setting a single-season record for the most points scored in women's high school play. In 25 games, she scored 803 total points. I mean, you divide that and you can find an average out. I'm not good with math, so but you can do that if you want to know. She scored 803 in 25 games, which is a record. In 1960, she represented the U.S. in the Olympics, which was held in Rome, Italy, and she won gold medals in all 3 events that she participated in. It was in the 100-meter dash, the 200-meter dash, and she finished at least 3 yards in front of her competitors in those events. 3 yards is from here to about here. And if you're talking 100 meters or 100 yards, that's a football field. It's a quick sprint, and she finished this distance. That's a big margin, by the way, in those short races, if you ever watch them. You see, and she tied the world record in the 100 meters and set a new Olympic record in the 200. And then she came from behind in the 400-meter relay to bring her team to win gold. She won 3 gold medals. See, she rose up above her circumstances. You see, the Bible says about Jabez that he was more honorable than his brethren. What does that mean? That simply means that he was worthy of more honor than the rest of his family. That's what that means. It means he was more worthy of honor than the rest of his family. You see? He wasn't necessarily a great leader, but one thing we know he was a great man of prayer. The Bible records, the Bible said he called on God. You see? He called on God. Well, let's look at that. Jabez and his prayers. Number 2, he prayed for prosperity.